Welcome to Midnight Menu Plus One. I'm Ray Canada.
And I'm Margo Moss. Midnight Menu Plus One is a food lifestyle show on the podcast network, itsneworleans.com. Brought to us tonight by Petite Pet Care. While you're at work or on vacation, you don't have to board your pet. He can stay in the comfort of his own home. For loving care when you're not there, Petite Pet Care. Find them at petitepetcare.com.
Each week on Midnight Menu Plus One, Margo and I invite a member of New Orleans' restaurant and food community to join us, and we invite them to bring along their own guest, a plus one. We never know who the plus one's going to be. Sometimes it's a friend, a neighbor, a family member, a fellow restaurant colleague. But our special guest tonight on Midnight Menu Plus One is a curator, cook, and culinary historian, Zella Palmer, the new program director of the Ray Charles Program in African American Material Culture at Dillard University. Very excited to be talking to her, but first, let's catch up on this week's culinary adventures. Margo, do you have anything worth reporting?
Well, I've been eating prepared paleo meals for the past 2 weeks. Though
it may be hard
we've
for
lost
other people
a lot
to
of
enter
weight,
into that experience
yes,
directly.
It's not very interesting, I guess.
But you
at
like
this
it.
point.
It's been good.
Love it.
Cool.
So, what about your week?
I had a lot of good meals this week, but let's see. People are passing us notes in the middle of the thing. What is that?
It's a love
Very
note.
mysterious.
Am I in trouble from
the great
the
bartender?
teacher?
Yeah, Dean Ellis just came in, but okay. That's interesting. I'm dying to see what that says, but the
It's
font's
for
too
me.
small. Okay, all right.
Your underpants are sticking out, or something like that. It might say.
Well, I passed. It's in my neighborhood, and it's by all these other great restaurants, Rum House, and I avoid it because it's always so packed, and it looks a little annoying in terms of like. I hate having to wait I never wait for a table. I'll never do it. It's a really great place to eat here. And, we were looking for other places. They were all crowded. Went by, and shockingly, on Sunday afternoon, it wasn't as crowded as usual. It's very popular. And I went. I hadn't been in a couple of years. And I think it's gotten, it was always good, but I think it got, even a lot better. I had fantastic. I couldn't stop ordering. I had, 4 tacos, and then I ate a big chunk of my friend's nacho plate, which is amazing. The Duck Duck Goose was crazy good. And they have all these kind of really exotic meats for tacos, It's a little like Juan's in that way. It's got a lot of strange things that Mexican purists would get very upset about. But it's got the lamb vindaloo is really awesome with the yogurt sauce and stuff in it, and it was real spicy. It was just awesome. I just had a great time. And then this morning, my wife and I went to the what's it called, Riccobono's Cafe on Pinola, Pinola Street 1, and it's just a little breakfast place, and it was fantastic.
Well, that's much more exciting than my
than your paleo?
Yes.
Well, no, that's kind of, it's interesting. All right, well, you're enjoying it so far. You're a couple weeks into it, right?
Yes. My husband's lost 15 pounds.
15 pounds?
Yeah.
Oh, man, that makes me want to reconsider. Oh, okay, well, that's pretty amazing. Well, we also need to mention Eat Fit NOLA Dine Out. This is still we're still a week or two out from this. So when you dine out at participating Eat Fit NOLA restaurants on Wednesday, August 20th, for lunch or dinner, proceeds will benefit Eat Fit NOLA programs, including on-site health screenings for restaurant staff, nutrition education and high school culinary programs, teaching gardens, community cooking demonstrations, all kinds of great stuff. So find out more about participating restaurants by clicking on the link on Midnight Menu Plus One's page on itsneworleans.com, or just go directly to eatfitnola.com. Well, I think it's time for our guests now.
Absolutely.
Zella Palmer is, as we said, the new director of the Ray Charles Program in African American Material Culture at Dillard University. And she is very interesting. She studied formally in 3 different countries, in Chicago and Toronto and Cuba. Can't wait to ask her about that. And she's also an expert in Southern foodways, and she's producing a new PBS show. Lots of great stuff. Can't wait to talk to Zella Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Will you pronounce your last name for us? Because I think I know how to pronounce it.
Sure. Well, my book is Zella Palmer Cuadra, but now I am Zella Palmer.
Okay.
She told us we could call her Zella Palmer before the show. Maybe you missed that.
I'm
And
sorry.
I was glad because I knew I couldn't roll my W or whatever I was
Your
supposed
R.
to roll in there. Yeah, something. One of the letters I couldn't roll.
So your book is under
Palmer Cuadra. Mm-hmm. Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
And I was going to ask you something else, but since you brought that up, can you tell us a little bit about your book and when you wrote it and what it's about?
Well, originally, I'm from Chicago originally, but I came down here as a kid, and on my dad's side, our roots are in New Orleans. My great-grandfather was actually from here, my great-grandmother, my grandfather, and they came to Chicago, through the train like a lot of people during the Great Migration. So in Chicago, I grew up eating African-American Creole and Latin American food. But I traveled a lot to Cuba during my university years, and I got an internship, and eventually I was an exchange student at the University of Havana in Cuba. So when I came here, after traveling through Latin America, backpacking like a lot of kids do during their university years, I just felt like New Orleans had a lot in common with Latin America as far as the architecture, the food, and the music. And at the time, I was doing my internship at the Southern Food and Beverage Museum under the leadership of Liz Williams.
Yeah, we love her. She's on
I
our
love
show.
her.
Yeah, she's great.
My mentor. I just adore her. So, I said, what has there ever been a book done about the history of Latin American cuisine in New Orleans? She said, no, Zella, you should write it. And I said, okay. So, I started to do research and just started to really talk to a lot of Latin Americans who are from here. And I wanted to put it all together. And it's really started in Edgar Sierra Jimenez's house. He's been a waiter at K. Paul's for about 25 years. Has worked at Brennan's, has the funniest stories. I mean, this Bananas Foster story where, he almost burns the curtains in Brennan's. It's just hilarious. And it's
So
really...
he's the reason why they shut down.
Yeah. Well, and, it was just an amazing experience. And I really just started to go into people's homes and just be a curator, basically, and what I do and what I was trained for when I was studying at the University of Toronto, So I just wanted for the Latin American community here to tell their story, basically, but through food, because it always starts with food. So that's how it started. I wrote the book, and like 3 years before I got it published, Liz Williams said, have you got it published yet? I said, nope, it's sitting right here on my laptop. And she called up University Press of Mississippi, and, they were looking for new authors, and bam, what can I say? My book was published after that. So I'm really grateful to Liz and everyone who was in my book, everyone who participated. I mean, everyone from every socioeconomic background. I also want to thank Hortensia Calvo at the Tulane Latin American Library. She helped me a lot with the research and just really got me to understand what it means to be Latin American in New Orleans and growing up here from the 19th century to the present. So...
Wonderful.
It was awesome. Yeah.
Now, how did you get to the University of Havana? I've never met anybody, I don't think, that has done formal study in Cuba, because I would think that would be a little bit of a hurdle to
It was.
get a visa
I mean, it was
there
the
or
Clinton
whatever.
years, so it was kind of lax, and I went through Berkeley, so I got to study over there, and
Were there a lot of
it was a
American
license.
students there?
My group, we were licensed to go over there, so we got to study at the University of Havana. So it was awesome.
How long were you there?
We were there for about 3 months, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 3 months. Yeah.
That must have been really interesting.
It was awesome. It was awesome. And it's so many similarities between New Orleans and Cuba. It's insane. And, through my research, I found out that Antonio Maceo and Maximo Gomez, who were the basically the liberators in a way of Cuba, they actually lived in the Treme. So that was interesting to find out. There's so many Cuban influences in New Orleans.
I mean, the Cuban flag, the modern one, flew for the first time in New Orleans before it did in Cuba, and there's a plaque to that on Poydras Street. I've met a lot of Cuban Americans here that don't even know that, but there's, of course, that long history of Cubans here that sort of now they've assimilated, and there's less maybe of a distinctive community of it. But what does it mean to be Latin American in New Orleans? What is that? Well,
I mean, it's, I go back to Chef Adolfo Garcia, who is one of New Orleans' biggest restaurateurs.
Both him.
It's basically being Creole. You know, that's really what it amalgamates to. Because I mean, Creole is such a broad, you know, but it's being part of the larger community, but also maintaining your own culture, you know. So I think that's what Latin American in New Orleans means. I mean, it changes all the time, you know, but it's also assimilating into the mainstream. It really is the gumbo of America, really, you know. And I think when
The gumbo of America.
yeah, it really is, you know. And I'm really proud to be here, and proud that New Orleans called me back, you know, because I mean, my family was here, you know, and I didn't know why I was here. And my sister went to Xavier, you know, and so I would come down here when I was a teenager and visit her. So it was awesome, yeah.
Yeah, comment on this thing that I say to people, and it enrages some people and it interests other people. I'm not even really sure I believe it, but I say it all the time. I always say to folks when they're trying to get a handle, like my friends that have never been to New Orleans, I'm a Yankee originally, and I'll say like, well, you know, they'll refer to this place as being Southern and so forth, and I always kind of try to correct them. And I say, well, I mean, in a sense, but really, it's a lot closer. What I always say is it's a lot closer to like a mix between Havana and like southern France or Italy. You know, it's sort of like a Mediterranean, kind of a rural Mediterranean culture mixed with like a Caribbean culture. And what do you think about that statement?
I absolutely agree. Christina Gruez, she wrote, I can't remember the name of the book right now, but she said that this was the Paris of Latin America, that New Orleans was the Paris of Latin America.
Paris of Latin America.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with her more. I mean, geographically, just where New Orleans is. And, you know, you got to think that this is a port city, you know. So when you look at port cities like New York or, you know, Charleston, I mean, you had a lot of influx of diversity, basically. Right. So when you look at where New Orleans is, I mean, it's right on the cusp of, you know, Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean, Cuba, you know, it's right there. And there were a lot of Latinos who were coming here from different socioeconomic backgrounds who were contributing to what we call New Orleans, you know, but they were kind of just pockets of community, and they were here, then they left, and, you know, it just depended on what happened. But, you know, I'll go back to Rafael Delgadillo, who was my colleague at University of New Orleans. I mean, he went to University of New Orleans, but New Orleans had the largest amount of Hispanic or Spanish newspapers in the 19th century, larger than New York. You know,
really interesting. Wow.
Yeah, he contested, you know, some scholars out there about that, and I think everyone should look him up. He has a great paper. His master's thesis was awesome about 19th century Latin American newspapers. Yeah.
Huh. But, you know, that kind of topic always interests me because, you know, like the oldest African American newspaper is out of New Orleans. It's still continuing. The largest Italian population in America came here first before New York. Prior to Ellis Island in 1892, it was here first. There's so many of those sort of the first Filipino community in America was here.
Absolutely.
And those things kind of blended together and created sort of a tolerance for mixing cultures and doing things in a fun way, like you said, a gumbo sort of approach to culture that is not typical of the South or any place else in America, really, it seems to me.
Well,
Do you agree with that?
I completely agree with that. I mean, when you look at like what we eat here in New Orleans, you know, they don't eat red beans and rice in Mississippi or Alabama, you know, but that comes from that Creolization, that Caribbean influence. You know, red beans and rice came from Haiti. You know, it's a Haitian dish, but right next door, shares the same country as Dominican Republic, and they call it la bandera dominicana, which means the Dominican flag. So they eat it on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So, you know, it's all of these nuances. I mean, nothing is null and void. It's just everybody just saying, we have good food, and that's what makes New Orleans so special is that we share food.
Right,
we love food.
Like one dish could have 4 or 5 different nationalities that went into it.
Absolutely.
And you don't have that. Like in other cities, you have an ethnicity brought a dish, and that was great, and then another ethnicity brought a dish, and that was great. But New Orleans, it seemed like it blended them in a way. And to me, that's a symbol of what the culture did here, too, and that's why it's really hard to sort of pin it down.
Absolutely, and I think that's why I love this city so much because, you know, it's nothing like it anywhere else, and I don't think you'll necessarily find. I mean, I'm a Chicagoan, you know, you know, I was born in Chicago, all of that, but this city just called me, and I just love it. Yeah, so.
Nice. Okay, so what other influences would you say this city, Latin influences that stand out culturally besides food?
Besides food, the music. Absolutely the music. You know, when you look back at who were the first jazz, who was there when jazz was created. It was also Mexicans that were there. Now, a lot of people don't know that, but, you know, the Mexican National Band was actually here. And they were contributing a lot, you know, to that. When you think about Manuel's Hot Tamales, you know, historically, he was a jazz musician. So he, just like, you know, when we look at Surrey's, one of our favorite breakfast joints, you know, the owner is a musician. Musicians have to eat, you know, so a lot of times musicians cook, you know, and we look at like Alexei Maiti, who is a popular Cuban percussionist here in New Orleans right now, and he's played for everyone. And in my book, you know, he talks about, you know, being just around his musician colleagues, and they're cooking Creole food and he's cooking Cuban food. And it's, you know, it's the same thing. You know, we love sports here. Cuba loves sports. You know, Cubans love food. New Orleans loves food. New Orleanians love food. So it's the same kind of culture, the Caribbean culture, that I think, you know, it makes New Orleans special. And to know the past, you know, and to respect the past, because you don't see that in a lot of cities.
Well, speaking of the past, I would like to know a little bit about you. So it makes sense that you would. We're talking about all this, but and that New Orleans is in your heart because you have deep connections to the area. But what drew you to combine food and Latin American culture? And in the first place, like what in your life?
Sure. I mean, I said, I grew up in Chicago. I grew up in South Side of Chicago, South Chicago, and all my friends were African American and Latin American, you know. And our family was, you know, combined. I remember when my grandmother died, you know, my sister's best friend, she's Puerto Rican, and she made all the food for our family. So it was never, you know, like you're this or you're that, even though Chicago is a very segregated city, but depending on your economic background, you live in the same neighborhood, you know? So me going to high school, you know, in Chicago, it was like all of my friends were from everywhere, you know? I was eating, you know, matzo ball soup, you know what I mean? And it was just normal, and we were just friends, you know? But my passion was absolutely, you know, Latin American food, and my own, you know, just family, just cooking dinner on Sundays or whatever, you know, and I ended up just having lots of friends who, you know, were Puerto Rican or wherever, Mexican, and I would just somehow end up in their kitchen, and then, you know, I didn't want to go outside. I just wanted to be in the kitchen and listen to the stories, you know, so that really, I think, ingrained in me my love for food. And then by the time I got to my master's degree at the University of Toronto, I had a lot of options as far as my internships. But I chose Southern Food and Beverage Museum because I wouldn't shut up about food. And I was trying to figure out a way, you know, to combine museum studies and food, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do, you know? And then it came together, and my book is actually dedicated to my professor who pushed me to come to New Orleans, you know, and she died of cancer while I was here, which was devastating for us, you know, because I couldn't wait to go back and tell her, you know, everything that I learned, but she was gone by the time I got back, so it was tough.
Well, I think it's time for your plus one. We ask our special guest to bring a mystery guest, a plus one. We never know who it's going to be till they arrive, and we don't recognize you. So tell us who you are, and tell us why don't you introduce your plus one? Tell us who she is and why you brought her.
Well, that's my mom.
Your mom. All right.
And I love my mommy. But her name is Alice Palmer. She is a powerhouse, and she has encouraged me from the beginning, and I thank her for basically, you know, sending me all around the world, because my parents, I think, are the biggest internationalists I've ever met in the world, and we had everyone living in the house. I mean, there was a couch for everyone, and, you know, in the middle of the South Side of Chicago, it was just crazy. I'll never forget when my dad brought the Swiss embassy on the middle of on a bus, on a chartered bus, and all of these, you know, black people and Mexican people were like, who the heck is that? And they're like, hello. So it was awesome, and I appreciate that for opening up the world to me and just traveling with me and taking me everywhere, because they're the ones who really taught me to love every type of food, you know, so I was never picky because we were eating Indonesian, Ethiopian, whatever.
Wow. Well, that's quite a resume. That's good you have a legacy here. That's great. Thank you.
Yes, I'm the mother of an amazing young woman. I knew that she was smart, but I had never heard her in her professional capacity. So this is quite an eye-opener, and delightfully so.
You mean till tonight?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yes, I have read the book, of course, but
Yeah.
I have never heard her expound like this.
Well, it's exciting.
And I can see now why she was selected to head this new project at Dillard. So we're delighted
All right.
to be here, and to hopefully you will adopt us as visiting New Orleanians or something such.
So are there others at home? Did you raise other interesting people?
Yes,
She
of
had brothers and
course.
sisters?
Of course, yes. My husband was the chair of the Sister Cities Committee under the late Harold Washington.
Ah.
And so part of his work was to make relationships, and so that meant traveling around. And as she said, and he's one of these umbrella people. He likes to bring everybody under the big tent. And he said offhandedly when he was visiting, I've forgotten, was it the Swiss or the whatever? Anyway, he said, "Oh, if you're ever in Chicago, come and visit." And at the time, I was associate dean of students at Northwestern, and he had the habit of calling on a Monday and saying, "We're having dinner with so-and-so on Wednesday," and that means dinner. This time, he called and said, "They're coming for tea." And they did indeed have a bus. It went from one end of the block to the mid of the block, and they were like little martinets. They're marching off into our house. And my neighbors, some of whom have not learned couth sometimes, said, "Who the are these people?" But there they were. And I have a delightful set of lovely dishes and beautiful ware from their visit. And that was very typical in our house. We had people sleeping on couches and visiting and passing through, and
From all over.
from all over. Yes.
Now, where were you raised?
I was raised up south in Indianapolis, Indiana.
All right.
Yes.
So Chicago is the big city from there, huh?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is indeed.
Yeah.
Yes. If you come that way, or you can go the other way and go to Detroit. Detroit was never of interest to our family. Sorry, Detroitans.
So how'd you end up as associate dean at Northwestern? Were you in teaching before that? Were you a professor before that, or were you always in administration?
I was a graduate student working on my doctorate, and I needed a job. And so one of the associate deans in my college said, well, they're looking for a tutor at the Black House. This is African American Student Affairs. I said, oh, it's right up my alley. I'd been a teacher for years and years. So I applied, and I held court on the third floor of this Victorian house. And the director was in the office next door, and he heard me actually being able to pull out of these students some essays and, this, that, and the other. And so when he decided to leave to be an FBI agent, he,
That's another story there. Okay.
that's another story, right? He recommended to the dean of students and the vice president for student affairs that I was the one. So that's how I got there.
All right. Are you still doing that, or have you retired?
Oh, no, I've had many lives since then.
And now you're enjoying New Orleans
I am
with
indeed.
your daughter.
I
and-
love it, yes. I love the fluidity. Chicago, unfortunately, has become a bit rigid. I'm sure you're aware of our social issues and so forth, and the intense poverty and all the other ills. And they have accumulated to such an extent that Chicago, when I came there in the 50s, wide-eyed and loving and going to too young to be in these places, but going to listen to every jazz group I could find with my suitcase in hand, and my play cousin who also had no business in these places. But it's very different from the way it used to be.
Now, who are some of the noteworthy jazz acts you saw back then in the 50s and 60s in Chicago? You see Charlie Parker?
That's the one I did not. There used to be a place called the Sutherland, and it had this curious. The stage was in the middle of the round bar, and so Miles Davis would walk in, climb up on the bar, leap over onto the stage, turn his back, of course, on everybody, and just start blowing. I remember the day, a Sunday, Dinah Washington was in town. Wow. She always had an entourage, and she'd walk in dragging her fur coat on the ground, and she'd climb over and start singing, and the group would sit over to the side and cheer for her. So yeah, I saw lots and lots of folk.
Now, well, music, obviously you enjoyed those experiences, and did you have music growing up in your home with cooking
God.
and
I've been
celebrating
secretly their vinyl for like ever.
Oh, your mom's staying with you now, and she's going to see it. Yeah. Are there any locked
scary.
doors in the place? Yeah. Any rooms off limits?
They had the best vinyl collection on the planet. They still do. And
Yes,
it's just crates and crates. And I just remember them just dancing all night, and, the music and the meetings, because they were always, revolutionaries going to take over the world. And I was just sitting
For
there
good.
and just listening. For good, for positive things. And, just their stereo and, the wine pouring and just strategizing and reading Nietzsche or whatever else they were doing, They were some eclectic, artsy, educated intellectuals, I would say.
I have to say, when she was about 5, I bought her a dollhouse, and we had it made especially for her. I love things like that. And so we came home from work, and there's the dollhouse on the floor in the living room. And there she is sitting on the floor in front of the dollhouse. And all the little furniture we'd had made, it's all outside the dollhouse in a circle. I said, well, Zella, what are you doing? She said, they're having a meeting.
And I think, that's what I learned and just brought here is just kind of that grassroots, organization. Because I think that's something that Chicago definitely has, in everything. We just organize,
New Orleans not as organized. Not so much.
And, when I first came here, I was kind of overwhelmed people because I'm like, okay, let's do this. And I had to, take it slow and just, learn how to, like I said, be a curator and listen to other people, And that really humbled me a lot because, sometimes that big shoulder Chicago, is just, overwhelming to people. So, to come here and just be, and just be still and just observe. I think that was amazing for me, and I needed that. I really did. Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant because I've seen a lot of people come to New Orleans and love it, and then kind of burn out on it, or initially find that they're not as accepted or whatever. And I think one thing I've strategized about how to be a good citizen here. In the 9 years I've lived here, and one thing I'm learning is you got to listen to the culture and talk less and listen more, and that's hard for me. And because it has a lot to teach you. It's got a lifetime worth of stuff to teach you. You can never take it all in here, but you got to shut up and just be. And that's rough for me.
That's
so
taking
thanks
me
for your
6
wise
years.
words.
That's taking me 6 years, and I'm finally getting there.
I'm on 9. I'm still blowing it all the time. We'll work on that together.
Yeah,
I think you're a little bit more of a natural than I am at that.
I'm trying. It's a work in progress.
And have you found that people, you listen and you are so respectful and learning about things, but do you find that people are inspired by that, and you maybe can bring people together and get them to be a little more motivated than their natural? I think
so. I mean, it started, with me just really working in the community, and just just going to people's houses and just listening to them, and I think that's why, one of the reasons why I was got this current position that I have now, because I know how to listen, perhaps, and it just, I don't know, I just want to be a part of something that's bigger than me, and really follow what Ray Charles' original vision was, and he loved the city. He wasn't originally from New Orleans, but New Orleans made his sound.
Yeah. But this might be a good break for Off the Menu.
Yes,
is where we ask you oddball questions.
We can get back to that because I have more questions about it.
Sounds good.
But this is the point in the show where we ask y'all questions that you would not typically hear on a job interview or at a university if you're it's a little off the beaten path. So my question for you, Zella, is if you were given unlimited funds to live in Cuba again for 1 year, but you could only have one sensory experience the whole time you were there, which would it be? Either hearing music and people, tasting food, feeling the environment and being able to create, or seeing life unfold. Which one thing would you be okay with experiencing for a year?
I mean, it would definitely have to be when the embargo ends. That's one. But I think it would be the one where being in the environment to create. Is that the one you just said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, tasting food, hearing music and listening to people, feeling the environment and being able to create with your hands, or visually seeing life
So in
unfold.
this creepy scenario, she's got you blindfolded and your ears plugged.
Oh, gotcha.
You can only
So you can only feel, see, or taste, or hear.
Taste, definitely. I mean, Cuban food, is just to me like New Orleans food. It's so complex but so simple, and it's just heart and soul, and I can remember just the same way that they have the Holy Trinity, same thing they have in Cuba, the sofrito, in Latin America, period. It's the base, and what you put at the bottom of the pot before you put any of the meat, before you put anything else, that flavor that, gives the pot its oomph,
The soul of it?
The soul of it, and I can remember just being there and, we're talking about they don't have a lot of the stuff that we have, the access to a lot of stuff, but they use with just garlic, cilantro, cumin. That meal is going to be the best meal you ever have, and then they have those paladas, which are like, home kind of restaurants, because you can't really open up a restaurant through the government, but you still can have a permission. I mean, it's complicated. It's corrupt and all of that. But, when you do get to be in somebody's house and they have a paladar, which is a small home cooked restaurant in a way, and you sit down and have that meal, arroz con gris, or, the roasted pork. I mean, my mom loves Cuban roasted pork.
Love the Cuban pork. That's my favorite thing on the planet.
And they roast it and, on the ground, and it's just it's a whole, festivity, and it's just amazing. And and I took that when I came here, so I would have to definitely say taste, because I couldn't imagine life without taste, and taste can just, it means so many things.
And you can learn so much about there's stories just in the flavors they put in, and their history, and so much culture. So that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And do you have a favorite place to eat Cuban food here in New Orleans?
Oh, that's a tough one. My house.
All right, when are we going?
After
this, okay.
Yeah, great cook.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Palmer, I have a question for you. So we've all had kind of brief encounters with people. We'll have a meal with someone or a meeting with someone, and it's been magical, and then the time passes, and then afterwards you tell the story, and every time you tell it, you start thinking of things you wish you'd asked them or things you wish you'd talked about. Sounds like you've had a vast array of interesting characters come and go through your life. If you had a choice of one person that you've met before to meet again, living or dead, we can bring him back for this story, this scenario. Who would that be, and what would you talk about? Do you have any? He's like, I had lunch with Harold Washington, and I never asked him about why he did blah 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 in Chicago, or whoever. I had a drink of Miles Davis, and he didn't. And all we talked about, all he wanted to talk about was my hair, and then I wish we talked about something else. I mean, what's
That's a tough question. My goodness. You don't have another question.
That's it. You got to answer it.
Gotta answer that.
Well, what's the first thing that pops in your head? I mean,
It doesn't. What pops into my head is just an array of people over many, many years. I don't know. Probably the students that I had, my Black House babies, who are extraordinary human beings now, who are interestingly in their 40s and have accomplished so much and have maintained their integrity and their creativity and all of that. And I stay in touch with a number of them, and they call periodically, and if I'm in Washington or whatever, or wherever they are, I get a chance to have dinner with them. And
well, tell us about
I
one.
enjoy that.
Just what first one that pops in your head. It's an interesting story about one of your ex-students or one of your ex-residents at the Black House.
I'm not close to him, but for example, Harry Lennox, the actor, was one of the young men who was very active. The Black House was a refuge in some ways. It was a launching. It was lots of different things. And he's an extraordinary human being. I have not seen him
Could you tell
in
back
years
then he
and
was
years.
extraordinary?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And he was very close to our assistant dean, and I remember him at his funeral, and he came into his own through there. And I was happy that I was invited back to talk about the history of the Black House.
Oh, when did that happen?
Oh, about a year or so ago.
Oh, neat.
A
So it's
group
still
of
operated? And
Oh, yeah, it's still.
Same
it's
place, same name?
Same place, absolutely.
Neat.
And I saw the number of the athletes who felt they were being mistreated, which they were at that time. And I'll never forget them. And these were all bright people, smart people. And they organized, and they're in the living room of the Black House, and they said, Dean, we're going to march on the administration building. I said, well, do you want me to go with you? They said, you'd go with me? I said, of course. So my predecessor had given me a wonderful bit of advice. He said, always tell the higher-ups what you're going to do. So I picked up the phone. I called the vice president, and I knew his secretary well. I said, Irene, we're marching on you. She said, fine, I'll clear the building. And we went over there, and this most articulate young man explained the circumstances, why they had organized. The vice president was an amazing man who said, I'll take care of it. They fired the athletic director the next day.
Wow, Northwestern's athletic director got fired the next day?
Cleaned it out and started anew. And these young men went on to some amazing accomplishments. So very rational, very sane, very articulate. And I think I enjoy an evening spent with them.
Oh, you need to write your book. You need to write a book. Now, Dr. Palmer has said that she's made a discovery about her daughter tonight by just being here and hearing you talk about your profession. Have you discovered things about your mom's profession while you're here that you hadn't really realized as she talks about?
I just watched,
Anything new tonight you learned, in other words?
I mean, just that if she says that I'm amazing, it's because she's amazing. I sometimes sit in awe and just her story is just amazing to me. And I admire her, not just because she's my mom, but I just really admire who she is,
You should have met her dad, too.
Yeah, there's something else,
Now, wait, What's the circumstances of your dad?
He's well, he couldn't afford to go to college, joined the Air Force, and had thought he would the highest that he could possibly be. When they ask you, well, what do you want to do? Well, military police. They gave him this test. They said, my God, you're super smart. And so why would you want to be military police? Had you ever thought about going into intelligence? He said, what's that? They said, listen, forget it. We're going to put you in intelligence. So that's where he was. He was monitoring the Russians in the 1950s in the mountaintop in Germany.
What?
And the Air Force is much more fluid than the Army. And so he said, I wonder what's at the bottom of the hill. So he came down, and with his compadres, they rented a room in a German lady's house. And from that moment on, he learned German. He's fluent in German. I have a 10-year. She's fluent in Spanish, But that led him into his eyes being opened to how incredible the world is. And so he bicycled through the Alps while he was in the Air Force, all these kinds of things. So by the time he and I met, he had had all these experiences. I'd had a few myself, and so there we were.
Where'd y'all meet?
We met at Malcolm X Community College. Yep.
Where's that?
Chicago.
This was one of those where the students took it over, renamed it,
What?
hired and fired the faculty, and that's Chicago. I had come to Chicago from Indianapolis, and I was looking for work, so I sat down with the phone. I had tried to teach in the schools, but that was so bizarre. I said, there must be something else here. I looked in the phone book. They had this list of city colleges. The first one said neighborhood I never heard of. The second one answered Malcolm X College. I said, aha.
That sounds like an interesting place.
So the guy came and picked me up. The students interviewed me. They said, you're hired.
No, wait, what year was that? Roughly?
My God. Yeah, that was in the 60s. Yeah,
So in the 60s, they had named a community college Malcolm X Community
Oh,
College.
absolutely.
Did not
And
know that. Wow.
My husband happened to have been the head of safety and security there. And we met because someone was hassling me, and I said, well, who should I talk to? They said, Buzz Palmer over there. So
His name was Buzz.
Edward
nickname.
Buzz Palmer.
Yeah.
That's right. I went
Endlessly
over
interesting.
there
Okay, that's
and
great.
You are the best +1. I'm sorry to interrupt you,
No,
but
I
this
know.
is
Yeah, that's
the
fine.
most
Listen,
incredible
talking too much.
evening.
Oh.
No, not at all.
So
No.
where is he now?
Oh, he's there babysitting with you.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
Rachel.
I thought you were going to have some dramatic story like the Russians
No.
killed him. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. I'm glad he's
Very much
safely
a
at home.
grandfather. Yes.
Oh, good. I'm glad he's safe.
He had a grandpa. He's watching
Oh,
CNN.
the world needs Buzz as long as possible. This is great. Oh, good. Okay.
Well,
I'm glad
thank
Putin
you
has a
for
god to
letting
him.
me be a +1. I enjoyed meeting all of you.
Oh, this is
And
great.
just let me just say, his father and his and
All from New
grandfather,
Orleans.
all from New Orleans, and they came here. They came to Chicago. They got on that train and came to Chicago. Worked in the coal. Related to Eddie Palmer, the boxer, from the late 19th century. And they were boxers, and what else did they do here? I can't remember what else. What else did they do here? They did so much. So, yeah, and it
Yeah.
goes way back, And I knew I was here for a reason, and we recently found that out. So it just solidifies why I'm
Right.
here.
Yeah, his great-great-grandmother was French Huguenot.
Oh, so Protestant French. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
In New Orleans?
In New Orleans, that's where
I've never heard about Huguenots in New Orleans. I
Well,
mean,
yep.
obviously French here, and you know about French Jews here, but I
I
never knew
know.
about French Protestants here.
And
Yeah.
cooks. That's
And
the
she was
crazy
a
part
cook.
about.
She was a cook too. Wow.
Yes.
That's so interesting.
Yes, and her husband, who was the Palmer, his grandmother or his mother
His mother and his
was named
father.
Alice.
Isn't that
Oh.
great? We just found that
We
out
just
literally
found this
like 2
out,
weeks
yes.
ago. We, someone, my uncle actually found this out and hired like a genealogist. And
Oh.
then we found out that her name was Alice Palmer, which is crazy.
Oh, and this is a random weird question, but Huguenots in America mostly ended up being Presbyterian. They didn't start their own denomination, so they joined the Presbyterians. And there's the only famous Presbyterian clergyman in New Orleans was Benjamin Palmer. But there's no relation there, right?
I'm sure.
we don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know.
Palmer's named for him,
Who
right? Then
knows?
Palmer
Yeah.
Park is named for him.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Who knows?
Get the genealogist on that. I'd be interested in that.
I just need to spend time at the New Orleans Public Library to really find out what's going on.
Common name, but I don't know.
Yeah.
You never know.
You never know.
Not a lot of Presbyterians around here, especially back then.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
working on that.
Zella, I wanted to ask you about now you recently participated in a documentary, correct?
Yes.
Will you-
Absolutely, and I want to give a big shout out to Susan Pfefferly, the author and documentary filmmaker of Vietnamese cuisine in New Orleans. I wish she could be here right now. We are actually currently working on. Actually, yesterday we filmed at Edgar Sierra Jimenez's house from Colombia. And we had sancocho, we had sangria. I mean, we had just an awesome time. He made cafe brulee. It was just amazing experience and just documenting his story. And I get to do it the second time around. I'm so excited because he actually gets to tell the story, through film. So she approached me, and it was funny, but she wanted to do something a Latin American. Voila, she finds my book. She says, dang it, it's taken. And I wanted to do something in Vietnamese. I said, dang it, it's taken.
Oh, wow.
So she approached me through Twitter, actually. I think through Chef Garcia, because Chef Garcia has been, like his wife and him basically adopted me,
Oh.
So they, hooked us up, and through Twitter, like, we basically, said, okay, let's meet. And then she said, I love your book. She's like, you basically did all the research for my film. And I'm like, oh, thank you. And then she's like, you know what? Would you like to be a co-producer? I said, absolutely. That's just amazing. So a lot of the people that you'll see in the film is actually from my book as well, but also other people that she found, and then other people that we found together. So, I mean, it's just an amazing.
Now, what's the topic? Is it New Orleans? And
the history of Latin American cuisine in New Orleans.
in New Orleans, and it's going to be a documentary.
It's going to be a documentary on
Amazing.
WYES.
How long?
It's going to launch in November.
Okay. Is it
So-
an hour or 2 hours?
It's going to probably be about an hour. I mean, right now we have like 5 hours of footage. It's kind of crazy. We have to do a lot of editing. And Lenny Delbert, who is the videographer, also the co-producer, he's been amazing.
Now, this is
with
totally
as well.
separate from like Peggy Laborde's series of different ethnicities in New
Well,
Orleans.
Peggy Laborde actually, I think, knows about it.
Okay, but it's not part of her. She's not narrating or anything like that. It's
I
not
think she
that.
is narrating it. If
Oh,
I'm
so
not
maybe it's in that
mistaken.
series then. That's kind of cool because they have like
Yeah.
Jews in New Orleans and Italians in New Orleans and so forth.
Yeah, I'm not
Lost
sure. Don't
restaurants in
quote
New
me on
Orleans.
that, but
Okay.
I know that Suzanne works, closely with her,
Yeah.
and she kind of. I mean, I have a lot of stuff going on right now with my position and all of that, but what I do is basically just suggest people, and we go to their houses, and I'm like, hola, it's me again. So
Cool.
yeah, it's been good. It's been good. Yeah.
Now you mentioned like cafe. Was it brulee? Is that how you said? How'd you
Cafe
say?
Brulee.
Yeah. Okay. Now
yeah.
does that mean burnt coffee? Is that what that is that like cafe brûlée here? Like
Yeah,
the French?
brûlée. I say it.
So that's like a
different,
Spanish
sorry.
version of that.
Well, that's the way Edgar says it. So I'm like, it's not the Spanish
Is it the
version.
same thing though? Is it like fruit burned with the
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's worked, like I said, he's worked at
The
Brennan's.
cloves
He's
in it
worked
and all
at,
that?
Yeah, he's worked at Brennan's.
Oh.
He's worked at, he works at K. Paul's right now. He's a poet, photographer, amazing photographer. I mean, he took so many amazing pictures during Katrina. It's insane. But, he prepared it for us with Latin American coffee. So he had
Cool.
his own little Latin American twist. And then we had Colombian sancocho, which is basically kind of like the Colombian or Dominican version of gumbo. But he
Oh.
put andouille sausage in it, and it was incredible. It just gave a whole new like twist to sancocho that I've never tried before.
wow.
Yeah.
Margo, we're getting signaled that we are out of time. You have one more question? I hate this.
I have many
know.
more
I have
questions.
thousands,
So, but maybe we could have y'all back. Maybe Buzz could babysit again, and we could
No, I
have
want
y'all
Buzz on
back.
the show though too. Though.
bring-
Yeah, I want
All right.
Buzz next
I
time
would
too.
love to
That
come back
was-
and talk
yeah.
about what I'm doing at Dillard, because that's I really want to put that out there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
One trick is, because we've been doing this for 2 years, we haven't had any repeat guests yet, but we have, in that if you have a friend who could be the guest, they could bring you as the plus one.
I
then we
would
can have you
love
back.
to actually bring back Christian Green, Master Chef. I
Cool.
don't know if y'all been watching him, but he's definitely a Louisiana native, and he's
Awesome.
our youth ambassador. And
Cool.
he
Let's
goes
book
on
him,
Monday.
and then you can be his plus one.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Is youth ambassador? He's young. Because I was going to ask you who is the youngest.
Well, we have
Chef.
2 ambassadors for the program. We have Leah Chase, who's the honorary ambassador,
cool.
who was good friends with Ray Charles.
Yeah.
and
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she was really close. And if you go on Dookie Chase's, you'll see pictures of Ray
Yeah, yeah,
Charles.
yeah.
He was very, very close with her and her husband as well, Mr. Chase. And so she is our honorary ambassador, and then Christian Green is our youth ambassador, because he was actually a Dillard alum. And he, for the longest time, he would say, how come we don't do anything about food and blah, blah, blah. And then he went on to actually become a chef. And I mean, he has 13 years working in New Orleans kitchens. And then he made the cut, and he's on Master Chef. And now he's in the top. I think he's in the top 8 right now. But I mean, it aired tonight, so I don't
Fantastic
know,
representing.
yeah.
And will you please stay in touch and let us know about exciting things that are going on there, that and hopefully we can
I would love that.
promote and support. And
I know Dillard would love that, and Ray Charles would love that, because I know he's watching over, and just kind of doing his thing. And he loved his New Orleans food, that's for sure. He loved red beans and rice and stewed chicken, as Leah Chase would say.
Cool.
And I want to mention too, I would like you to, I know you write a blog. I don't know how much time you're going to have to do that in the future, but it's lovely content, and it has
thank
recipes and interesting stories.
Thank
and
you.
so would you tell
Sure.
us about how to find that?
It's houseofzella.wordpress.com. So, yeah, it's houseofzella.wordpress.com. So,
All right.
All right. Well, thank y'all so much for joining
Thank
us on
you.
Midnight Menu Plus One. We really appreciate it, and I know you're visiting, so your time is very precious, and you're very gracious
You two
to
are
join us.
delightful. Thank you.
thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Well, our special guest tonight on Midnight Menu Plus One was the great Zella Palmer, and her plus one was her mom, Dean Alice Palmer. You can find out more about both of them and any of the projects they're involved in by following the links on our website. It's neworleans.com.
And thanks tonight to Petite Pet Care for loving care when you're not there, petitepetcare.com.
And thanks also to our hosts, Monkey Hill Bar on Magazine Street, 6100 block at Monkey Hill. You can enjoy a 5-hour happy hour every weekday from 3 to 8 p.m. And every Tuesday is Taco Tuesday, Coronas, margaritas, and sangria specials plus $2 tacos.
See y'all next time on Midnight Menu Plus One. Till then, I'm Margo Moss.
And I'm Ray Canada. Good night. Midnight Menu Plus One is produced by Margo Moss, Grant Morris, and me, Ray Canada. Our technical director is Chris Keogh.
You can find photos from tonight's show on our website, itsneworleans.com. On itsneworleans.com, you can also check out our blog. You can listen to lots more episodes of Midnight Menu Plus One and our other shows, including Out to Lunch, Happy Hour, True to the Game, and Mindset.
You can hook up with me and Margo anytime by following Midnight Menu Plus One on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And you can also Google Midnight Menu Plus One, and we come right up.
The fabulous audio quality of this show is brought to us by PreSonus Audio. For more information about PreSonus recording equipment, go to presonus.com.
Midnight Menu Plus One is a production of INO Broadcasting for itsneworleans.com. For all of us here at Midnight Menu Plus One, thanks for joining us. I'm Ray Canada.
And I'm Margo Moss. We look forward to seeing you back here next week on Midnight Menu Plus One.
You know Labor Day signals the unofficial end of summer, but not the end of your outdoor projects. Lowe's helps you do it right and helps you save with Labor Day deals throughout the store. Shop now and get 2 bags of Stay Green potty mix for $12. And keep your lawn looking neat and trim with a Craftsman 2-cycle 17-inch gas string trimmer, now $20 off at just $119. Whatever's still on your to-do list this Labor Day, do it right for less. Start with Lowe's. Offers valid through 8/28. Soil offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii. U.S. only.